Details of these and other stories in a moment.
Congratulations to WGPR TV.
Big City News. News and information for the urbanites.
Amazing, those scenes from the past changed the future of broadcast television. And it all started in the heart of Detroit. It was right here in this small television station on East Jefferson that countless careers began. We want to welcome you to WGPR TV. I'm Carolyn Clifford.
And I'm Dave Llewellyn. We thank you for joining us tonight here in the place that was once home to the first African-American owned and operated TV station in the country.
There is so much history surrounding us in this very room. Back in the day, there were studio cameras and an anchor desk sitting right here. But now it's a museum highlighting the important work that was done right here in this room.
I got the chance to walk through the WGPR Museum for the first time recently. The story of this station may not be widely known beyond the city of Detroit, but its impact is undeniable. WGPR's history dates back 50 years. That's when William Banks and a colleague attended a White House dinner, pressing then-President Richard Nixon during the evening for a broadcast license in Detroit.
Channel 62 was becoming available. They made a pitch for it. President Nixon made sure that they talked to the right people to get the license.
Joe Spencer, a longtime WGPR employee, guided me through the station's history in museum space that originally served as the station's primary studio. On September 29, 1975, WGPR went on the air as the nation's first African-American owned and operated television station.
We are now recognized as a national historic site as well as a Michigan historic site. And it's because we were the very first in the nation. We had many, many significant accomplishments during the life of the station.
That included original programming and daily newscasts. And here in the museum, on the television, we're seeing the very first Big City newscast.
Big City News. News and information for the urbanites.
Amir Jacobson first appeared on television in Detroit on WGPR, eventually moving to Channel 50, where she anchored the news for years.
And a weekend search for Jimmy Hoffa has turned up nothing.
A young Amir on her very first day on our newscast. Yeah, this is historic.
Good evening, I'm Jerry Blocker.
One of the key was Jerry Blocker, who was
well-known at Channel 4.
Exactly, and he left Channel 4 to come here to direct the news division. And he was, in fact, the one who brought me here.
In addition to Monday through Friday newscasts, WGPR produced hours of other original programming.
One of the most popular shows we had on the air was The Scene. And,
remember it well.
The music, the fashion, the dance was all part of it, and part of what was a reflection of the city. It set the style for many, or magnified the style, let's put it this way.
It's kind of Detroit's version of Soul Train, if you will.
Absolutely, yes, it was. A lot of people compared it to that, Soul Train had their own style and we had ours.
During our tour, Joe pointed out with pride other Detroiters who got their start in the television industry at WGPR.
This board is an example of the legacy of the station. We call this our career springboard.
And training broadcasters of the future is an important part of the legacy of WGPR.
That is our legacy. We put so many people in this business. So they came here, they got that first 2 or 3 years of experience, and then they were able to go on to stations like 7 and 4 and 2.
Such an important legacy. And as we continue our celebration of Black History Month, we want to start a conversation about this station's lasting legacy.
Yeah, and there's so much of it. Tonight we are joined by a group of people who have made their mark in journalism and a couple who are just beginning their journey into this field. You may recognize Amir Jacobson. She's been on Detroit's airwaves for decades and was one of the first anchors right here at WGPR.
Al Allen is a Michigan Journalism Hall of Famer. He covered the news in the Motor City for nearly 50 years on radio and TV And it all started on television at this very station.
Also with us tonight is our very own Alex Bozargian. Alex has been a reporter with us at Broadcast House since the summer of 2021 with experience covering minority communities as a minority herself.
And Blake McQuarrie is a junior at Eastern Michigan University, majoring in sports journalism. Young man from Flint, graduated from Grant Blake High School. Thank you, Blake, and thank you to all of you for being here with us for this very, very interesting and important conversation tonight.
Quite historic.
Yeah, grateful to be here. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So, Amir and Al, I'm going to start with you guys because you were here in the very beginning in 1975. So tell me some of your memories from when you started. What was it like? I mean, it was groundbreaking, covering African-American issues right here in the city of Detroit. The first it had been done here.
Well, first of all, I was born knowing what I wanted to do. I had 3 or 4 ideas and kind of tailored them down as we went on. I walked in here as a mere porter and anchored the first newscast and thought I was in heaven. It meant so much to me, and it was so professional, and I met so many people, I learned so many things. I thought I had the best job in Detroit. And just different kinds of exposures, different kinds of relationships and contacts, different thoughts and doings, and it was just wonderful. It was wonderful.
And you were a natural right from the beginning if you got on that anchor desk right in the beginning.
Yeah, that was my first time actually on television. Amir Porter and Pal DeQ anchored the first big city news. We had a noon news and an evening news.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And Al, all your decades in television in Detroit started in radio, WGPR, and then here before all those years at Fox 2, but and Channel 2 back in the day when we were there together. Talk about those early days here. I mean, building something from the ground up, not an easy task.
It's not an easy task, and they had Dr. Banks and the others had an uphill battle to make sure they got that license. I mean, it was not like you walk in the door, I got this application, and we'd like to have the first African-American TV license. It was difficult to do that. But, you know, you look back, it was needed. And I'm one of those junkies in news where I says that everyone needs to be informed. And this was just another piece to the puzzle to the African-American community that you can do this. It also, besides just doing news every day and programming every day, it provided jobs for people to work. It provided anchors and young reporters to come in to learn, to get a taste of what this is all about. So this was an important venue for the city of Detroit. You know, Detroit is always known, we do a lot of things first, which is a good thing. And this was first. The radio was first. So the legacy carries on. But it was, like we said, a training ground, but also a link to informing the African-American community that you do have a voice. And we need to inform you about what is actually going on. I've always said, you need to know what your next door neighbor is doing. And it'll help you along the way as well. So this is a challenge, but it worked. It really worked. And the eyes of the nation was on WGPR TV and radio.
So groundbreaking when you think about so many African Americans getting their start, because growing up in the city of Detroit, you saw so many African American faces on all of the stations. But then when you started traveling around and going to other stations, a lot of times I was the only African American in a newsroom in 3 different markets. So Detroit was
and we know
so
representation
different.
matters.
It absolutely matters.
Right, and in television as well.
Yes, it does. It really does. You know, communicating, that's very important. We say it in a word or terms, but you have to communicate with those who listen to you, who watch you on TV. And, you know, to young people coming up and they watch and they say, I didn't think I could do that. But now I see myself on TV. Or I see myself in a microphone and radio. And then it's like I said, teaching moment, whereas this is helping you to say that you maybe have been told that you can't do this, you can't do that, but you can. And this is another focal point of WGPR.
That's a good segue into our younger people here, Alex and Blake. Alex, let's start with you. I mean, you've gotten a chance to walk around this historic place, and you cover historic issues on Channel 7 now. What are your thoughts on a night like tonight?
Well, I think that a newsroom should look like the world that you live in. So it's really important to have that representation, to have that diversity. And being someone who, my mom is from the Dominican Republic, being very aware of that dichotomy of what it means to be white appearing and then have a mother who's brown, and the difference in that experience and why those stories are so important, where you want to make representative content. You want to make stories for communities, not about them. So that's that whole idea of just covering things when the bad things are happening. You want to be there when the good things are happening, and truly tell authentic stories. And I think with diversity, that creates meaningful insight, meaningful contacts. When it's all, when you lack that, then I don't think you're telling the true stories, and they're not as meaningful and as authentic as they should, and as fair, and they don't really represent the community.
And it's different voices and it's different viewpoints being brought into the discussion, right?
Absolutely.
Even to decide what news to cover, what news not to cover.
Right, and you do the community a disservice, when you don't have that diversity.
Before we move to Blake, talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. You got a chance to cover a lot of the protests here in the city of Detroit. What was that like for you, jumping in so young, so early?
So I actually covered most of it in Savannah, Georgia. So I was in Georgia at the time, sort of the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement, which it's, a different experience, being, with that history in the Deep South. It's just, there's an intensity to it. And it's really sort of understanding the past so we can really make a better future. And history is so important. And atonement, I think really taking a second to say, the news industry at one point, we failed communities of color, and we have to acknowledge that so that we can then, right those wrongs.
We'll turn to Blake now, a junior at Eastern Michigan University, interested in sports journalism. With a goal of one day working at ESPN.
Yes, sir.
Give us just a little bit of your background, where the interest came from, and how you see that in your mind being realized as you move forward.
Yes, so my interest in journalism came when I was very young. I always wanted to be, a sports broadcaster, journalist, somebody on TV, telling the stories of sports entities and people like that. It started when I was, very young. My dad, who always had ESPN on at the house, I looked up to Stuart Scott, Stephen A. Smith, guys like that, and I, had a talk with my dad one day. It was like, I want to be, one of those guys. I want to be up there, one day.
Was he supportive? Was he encouraging?
Oh yeah, he's always been supportive of everything that I do.
Yeah.
And he, actually sat down with me at a very young age, and kind of gave me the blueprint of, how to get there and what I needed to do to get there.
Stephen A. Smith was in this building not too long ago, getting an award and being celebrated for his remarkable career. So you have big shoes to fill, but you're following in the right footsteps, right?
And we'll talk a little bit about the path that you're taking as we continue, but it's great to have you here as well.
Honored to be here.
Yeah.
Well, it's important for us, of course, to talk about so many things tonight and to add some context to the conversation. Detroit was a major player in the national civil rights movement, of course. We want to walk you through the historic events that led up to the launch of this very station.
Many of the people who once walked through the halls of WGPR will tell you this station gave them their start when no other place in town would. It was an issue that should have been resolved years before with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The law guarantees equal employment for all, making discrimination on the basis of race in hiring, promoting, or firing illegal. But the fight for equality was far from over. During the summer of 1967, tensions boiled over in the Motor City. A police raid of an illegal after-hours bar on 12th and Claremont sparked 5 days of violence and chaos. The deadly riots led to a mass exodus from the city of Detroit that was once home to a predominantly white population. In the summer after the riots, 67,000 people rushed to the suburbs, with another 80,000 following the next year. It was during that time we saw a dramatic rise in crime. Detroit's population dropped while the homicide rate soared. By the early 70s, the city had earned an unfortunate nickname, the murder capital of America. While there were signs of growth and positive change in Detroit, those stories were often overshadowed by negative headlines.
So much heartache in the city of Detroit, as we all know, during the '67 riots, but that led us to 1975, the year WGPR hit the airwaves. This is really one of the first opportunities for Black Detroiters to tell their stories from their own community, which we've been talking about already.
Right, certainly on television. I mean, we had the Michigan Chronicle here for years, of course, serving, African Americans in the city of Detroit and the community at large. But Amir, the opportunity to tell those stories on television, how impactful do you feel that was?
Extremely. As somebody had already mentioned, television should reflect your community, and it did not in any sort of a way. We mentioned Black Lives Matter. In my opinion, that was a real restart to everything. We became more conscious with that going on and with the insurgents going on. Everybody likes to know what's kind of off kilter, but as I think one of you said, you got to show the good. It's not all bad. The people's opinions are reflected through what they see on television, and it's so different now, and it's so right now, and it's getting more different because we have to always have in mind, why don't people know about this museum? Why don't people know that slaves built the White House? There's so many things that we don't know because it's not taught. And if we don't, if people like us, people like you who care enough to want to tell the true story, the real story, I think it's invaluable because the history has got to be known. If you don't know your history, how does that expression go? You're bound to repeat it.
Well, yeah, I was watching the NAACP Awards this weekend.
Yeah.
And they were speaking about that very thing. It's a national topic right now, the fight for Black history to be taught in classrooms, and it really shouldn't even be a fight, because if you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat the dark past. Al, talk about what stories do you remember? I mean, I know we have the Black Lives Matter movement now, but back in the day, in '75, when this station first started, I mean, what stories jump out at you?
We had, at that time, the first Black mayor in the city of Detroit.
Absolutely.
And that was something the city, perhaps some didn't really care about, but he did things in the city of Detroit. He changed things in the city of Detroit. He would always get on me, and he would say that he called me Columbo. And I says, Mayor, why do you call me Columbo? You know my name. Because you stand back there in that room with that raggedy trench coat on, and you wait and ask this asinine question. That's why I called you Columbo. But, that was the beginning of a change in the city of Detroit. We never had a Black mayor before. So we had another perspective of the African American community. And here again, we talk about if you see it, then you can believe that you could be the next mayor of the city of Detroit or the next governor of the city of Detroit. So all of these things happen. And of course, we talked about the crime rate in Detroit. Back in the 70s, it was horrible. Right. We were the murder capital. But it was drugs that sparked the flame of this. And I mean, there were shootings daily. We used to, in the room and the station, have to decide which story we're going to cover because so much is going on. But it is important for us to realize that this was another communication link to the African American community, how they were feeling, what were they going through, seeing these things. And with like WGPR TV, they offered another perspective to the city of Detroit and the growth it was going through.
And you see Mayor Coleman Young's picture sprinkled throughout the walls in this museum at this point.
Yeah.
Not just a Black mayor, but a Black city council, right? And you see Black managers in malls and a little bit of everywhere. But talk about this, Amir, before we move on to our young journalist here. there were important people that would come through these halls. Anybody important who came through the city of Detroit would land here for interviews, right?
Absolutely, and it was easy because we would ask and they would immediately say, oh, I'd love to come, help you out with your effort. We, senators and congresspeople and entertainers and sports stars, and they were happy to be here, and we were happy to have them because it made us feel like, well, we can pull the best of the best like everybody else can. It was very helpful to us, and it was extremely impactful, in my opinion, to almost everybody because sometimes you don't even know what you don't know, and it's like, what, But it was a pleasure. It's just a pleasure and honor that they look at us like that.
Even Michael Jackson's father came for an interview with him here. She told me earlier.
I interviewed him. He was pushing, I think, oh, God bless him.
Yeah.
I think Joe Jackson bourbon.
There you go.
Alex, you mentioned the covering the Black Lives Matter protests in Savannah. Blake, young man, growing up, seeing the protests, not just, in Detroit, perhaps in Ypsilanti or Flint, but around the country. What was your perspective on that moment in time?
It was just a time of just uncertainty and a time of just kind of bringing it back to, where it was. And it kind of taught me, the history of everything. And it opened my eyes to what needed to be done, just with the protests and everything like that. And I was a senior when all of this was going on. I had just graduated high school, and we as students, a group of students, we decided to hold our own protest, just to bring change and bring, awareness to the situation and what needed to be done.
Are you hopeful that progress is being made, or that the opportunity for progress is there because more people are aware of the change that needs to happen?
Yeah, I'm very hopeful, and it's something that I've carried with me ever since I started learning about it and getting in tune with everything, and it's something that I will carry forever with my journey, and I think it's very important that we need to teach this, and we need to let people know the history of what has gone on and what has transpired.
Alex or Blake, let me ask you this. When you think about the Black Lives Matter movement, when you think about some of the people who are marching in the street, I know I watched young people. I saw older people. I saw black people. I saw white people. I saw Arab people. I saw people of all different ethnicities out there marching together, hand by hand, and fighting for the same cause. What did you all think of that when you saw that on the streets?
I think that whole time period, there was just such a charged energy to it, where, I think as a young journalist starting out, it really invigorated, exactly why I was doing what I was doing and how I wanted to be part of that growth and that change. And to see people kind of coming together and, realizing that, sure, we're all very different, but we're all very similar too, and I think at the end of the day, we're all human. And we can all find parallels. And I think when we focus on those parallels, we can find that common ground where we can truly, lean into the good of the world and create, something that's more balanced, something where, the color of your skin will never, block an opportunity from you. So I think that there was a lot of being cognizant of, we are shaped by our experiences, but also understanding that we can find common ground pretty easily, when we lean into, love and equality and fairness.
All fighting for the same cause.
Yeah. Is there a sense of history repeating itself almost with the Black Lives Matter protests compared to the civil rights protests? Is there some similarities there?
There's a lot. People my age are saying, when were we going to pass the baton to young people who can take over the struggle? Because the struggle is still going on.
Right.
We still have these issues we had back in the 50s and the 60s. As a matter of fact, I was in high school when Dr. Martin Luther King came and they had the march down Woodward Avenue. we were in a club called the Hexagons, and we were laughing. We were saying, well, where are we at in the march? You know, where's Dr. King? We didn't know. All we were told, just keep marching down toward Jefferson and you'll find out. But that was when I was in high school. So you carry that torch from generation to generation. And it was a great time for the city to do that.
Yeah. Amir, let me ask you a question. Because you all started here in 75. We're now in 2023. When it comes to the news, are we doing enough? Are we doing enough, you know, to move America forward in a positive direction, or are we getting it all wrong?
I don't think we're getting it all wrong, but I think you can say yes to both parts of that question. The biggest problem I have is that people always trusted news. They don't trust news anymore. And you go to talking about, what's that expression? I don't know, but I would like people to, in my background, I really never experienced where we made up stories or padded stories but that's what not everybody, that's what people think the news does now. And that's wrong. Or
fake news?
Fake news. Fake news. And it really bothers me because you try so hard to get it right and get it where it needs to be and tell people what they need to know. And you get slapped around a lot. I don't know exactly where that came from, but it's a terrible
Sometimes when it comes from the highest office in the land and then trickles down, people believe it, but it's incumbent on us to make sure people know they can trust us.
And cable news, too. I mean, you know, if it was just 2, 4, 7, and 62 like back in the day, we'd all be better off, right, Al?
That's right. You know, we talked about this before. We were taught this. In the middle of chaos and confusion, there we are with a microphone standing there, but you're offering hope and comfort to those who may be doing the other things. So we had a role to play. You know, when people were always saying, oh, I don't want to watch that. There's so much of this going on, so much of that's going on. But if you notice, when something big happens, everybody's got the TV on, or they got their cell phone.
And what are they looking at?
And what are they looking at?
Yeah.
That's
Well,
right.
like the pandemic. When you think about the pandemic, I mean, it's ironic that was where fake news kind of was in its height, but we were so central to, you know, people navigating this never before, you know, experience that altered every single aspect of our lives. And we were those voices that people look to. When can we go out in the house? You know, what's safe, what's not? So absolutely, you know, I mean, we are those lights, you know, in the darkness.
So how do we cut through to young people? Alex, Blake, you all depend on your phones. A lot of kids are looking and thinking that they can get news from Yahoo News and some of everywhere else, and and TikTok, and sometimes wherever. And sometimes it's wrong, just like we saw with the MSU shooting. Wrong information went out. What do you say to young people?
And everybody's got a degree for Google.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Google everything. So
Dr. Google.
What do you think we should
That's
do?
right.
You know, what's the message we should send to young people to trust the news instead of trusting maybe that digital footprint?
I really wish I had like a well thought out answer to that. I think about it every day. I really do, especially when, you know, most of the time people around our age are like, well, I don't watch the news. Yeah. You know, they don't. You know, exactly. It's the audience is usually, you know, like their parents or their grandparents. So, you know, I think this move to digital, you know, I think that meeting them where they're at is incredibly important. But, you know, the internet opened so many doors. It helped people, you know, have access to information, but also access to false information. So it's this double-edged sword. And I don't know, I think, you know, it's going to have to be a collective thing. And, you know, hopefully we can find a way to bridge that gap. But certainly, you know, I think, you know, unfortunately, for whatever reason, we're still missing that audience, and I don't know how we get there.
Well, and Blake, you're a young guy, so you know you're looking forward to a career in media, in television. What's your thought on what the future might hold?
So, I mean, every day when I scroll, you know, through my phone, it's so hard to tell, you know, what's real and what's not, and it's so hard, you know, for people at home to pick that. I think, you know, a very important aspect of where this starts is teaching, you know, younger kids, you know, the logistics of everything and what, what's real and what's not. I think just like how we learn history, how we learn math, how we learn science, it starts in school, sitting them down, making them learn that, opening their eyes to it and bringing, awareness. I think it will allow them to, some of them, at least to kind of learn and bring on this importance that they want to, help bring change as well.
I know our company did a series of stories, Scripps did, for high school students, for college kids, so they'll learn where to get accurate information and how to pinpoint what's fake and what's real, which is very, very important.
Credible sources are going to remain important. Brands that deliver credible information are going to continue to be important. But you're right, Alex. I mean, you got to meet people where they are on all these different devices.
That social medias, they have algorithms that are going to show you, you like something, whether it's, liberal or conservative, okay, the algorithm is going to start showing you more conservative things. So understanding that you need to go out of your way to seek diverse information, seek diverse viewpoints. That was part of a social media class in college where you learned about filter bubbles and basically social media is trying to show you just one side, and that's where we get polarization. That's where we get this side and the other side, and there's no meeting in the middle. So just like Blake was saying, news literacy, like really understanding how to navigate the information that you're taking in all the time, because now there are generations that know nothing else but phones, but this whole universe that exists online, and it's overwhelming. It's really overwhelming.
Blake, one more question for you. Because you're at Eastern Michigan University, and I brought up the MSU shooting, I know a lot of students went to their phone and went to various sources to get information. What about at Eastern? I mean, where do you go to? What's your source in terms of, where do you go for information? Who do you trust?
So, that's a very great question.
And I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
But you're here, so you're on the spot. So answer it.
Honestly, where do you go? Twitter. Whoever's got that check mark on their account of who's sharing this news, how credible is it, how up to date is it. But most of us, I think, we're just getting it from ear and who was closer to the situation. But I mostly just, I was getting my information from mostly just news stations who were kind of just tweeting out updates and things like that. Journalists who were tweeting out updates.
And hopefully they were getting the correct information from official sources, from public safety agencies who are doing the work and doing a good job of also pushing out accurate information, versus hearing stuff on the scanner that some of it might be accurate, some of it might not be. So, there are a lot of challenges in our responsibility to be fast, but also accurate and fair, right? I mean, accuracy, most of all, is critical to what we do.
Of course.
Amir, let me come back to you, because I want to talk about the relationship between the news media and, say, for example, the African-American community and other minority communities. Are we doing a good enough job in terms of reaching out and making that connection in terms of the stories that we do, the topics that we cover? Are we doing enough today in 2023?
Well, I think we're doing things a little differently, and I think there's been progress, but I also think that there's always room for improvement. People will tell you, I get tired, you do the same stuff over and over again. Well, you want to go out and create something for us to do? We have to report what it is that's there and what we have to see. But I get so frustrated sometimes with the things I hear. And frankly, I wish I had an answer for you. I don't know what we do. But I think we're more into the community than we ever more. I think we're going to get more in the community than we have ever had. But you gotta walk a fine line there. People say, I don't like this, I want this. But if you don't come up with that glitz and glamour or whatever it is they're looking for, then they'll turn you off. and watch somebody else. Now, we're not in business to get turned off or not be watched. No. You gotta read them like they're trying to read us. And if we can find some kind of middle ground, I don't know. Things have become so difficult now.
And while younger generations may be turning to their phone, a lot of generations are still turning on that television and looking for trusted sources in the news.
Absolutely. That's where I get my news. And you can pick it apart if you want, or, I just don't see how you can do that with any verification, with anything that's solid, that you can look back on.
Well, and hopefully we're doing a better job, today than we did, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago in that regard.
I think
in terms
definitely,
of serving the community and all members of our communities.
Yeah.
Well, if you remember, it was our generation, we would cover politics. In the 80s, the directors were telling us, we're not doing those stories anymore. They're boring.
Yeah.
We want to do something else. But now politics has come back like Niagara Falls, and we cover politics day in and day out, from sunset to sun up, Yeah. So when we're talking about changing things, but I know, looking at the viewers, and Amir probably will help me with that too as well, people in this town particularly don't like change. They like to see Dave, they like to see Carolyn, they like to see Amir every day. They don't want to see anybody else. And when somebody leaves, they get frustrated. Why did they leave, so forth like that. I always said Detroit is a big country town because people they're trusting you. And that's what you want. And people do not like anchors, reporters giving their opinions. They want to hear the story, and they want us to let them decide what is right and what is wrong.
And speaking of politics, you have to think about it with newspapers going under. I mean, it's the small-time newspaper that a lot of times will do that little investigation that will uncover corruption that television stations will then head to at that point. So it's really difficult when you think about newspapers going under, radio stations going under, and even news not having investigators in politics to really
because it is an important
corruption.
function of what we do still is holding officials accountable. Those elected and otherwise. We've got the severe power outages right now, and people are asking questions of DTE. Are you doing the job? Are you fulfilling your obligation as a utility company to your customers? There's a lot of questions, right, that have to be asked and answers that are necessary.
You talk about customers, it really irritates me when people say you just do it for the ratings, That's just a word that measures your success or not success. Ford Motor Company calls it an F27. General Motors calls that's their ratings. General Motors calls it a Cadillac. I think we've been zoned in on, and it's unfair. We have to battle it. We have to fight it, but it's unfair, and it brings about false information again.
Yeah. Now, I want to bring this back to WGPR because we started this conversation talking about how groundbreaking this station was because there were so many African Americans, not just in front of the scenes as reporters and as anchors, but behind the scenes. A lot of training went on. First African American directors and producers and things like that. Today, when you think about newsrooms across the country, do we have enough minority representation?
No, we don't. No, we do not.
Even though
the numbers are still low.
Yeah. You can see the difference on air. That's one job. There are tons of jobs.
Right.
And what's happening back there? Where are the decisions made? We were talking also earlier about story choice. There are meetings every day. The news department, what are we going to cover? What have we covered? What do we have video for? It's not just you walk in there at 9 o'clock, sit down, do news. There's so much that goes into it. And in my, naive or not, in my belief, it's decent and honest and good, but somebody else comes along and rips it all up, and what a mess.
So what's the solution? Let's go one by one. What's the solution now? I know I mentor a lot of young people who look like me, teach them about the business, tell them how to get in the door. How do we improve the numbers so we do have equal representation in newsrooms across the country?
One thing, I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
A lot of young people used to come to me and want to talk, And I always talked to them, and I never took more than a day or two to get back to them. And the thing that I would tell them is, don't give up. You really want to do this, fight for it. It seems to me that what I kind of learned from it was a lot of people who discourage you. Oh, you're not going to make, nah. And if they believe in themselves and have someone else that believes in them as well, I hate to see them walk away because somebody said, don't do that, And just a quick example, I was, not that I'm putting myself above, but I had a job in Detroit and I was making maybe, I don't know, $15,000 or something. At that point, I thought I was rich, But then I was offered a job for way less than that to do some voice work. I left my job and went and did the voice work because that's really what I wanted to do. And so I try to tell, fight for what you want, believe in what you want, put everything you've got into what you want, and it'll happen. And everybody has to have that little flick of luck. So I believe it'll happen.
There's still that perception, and that's why we need more minorities behind in the decision making of what you see every day or what you print every day. Because there are people who still believe that we're not who we really are. We do these things, and they see it and they say, oh, see, I told you that's what I'm talking about. But that's not true. Right. But that's part of our job, to correct those mistakes that have been made, to show that, no, they are not like that, and that these young people are not like you think they are. They always have this perception that, when I was a kid, they always said, ooh, that generation, Lord have mercy, the country is in trouble. Now, I look and says, ooh, that generation, country's in trouble.
Well, and in fact, that's part of the mission here at WGPR and the museum, and something that they want to get back to is the training of young Detroiters, ages 12 to 18, in this business to provide opportunities in the future. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a wonderful addition to the legacy that's already here, so that young people younger than this young man are going to have an opportunity to to learn about the business, right? To get some training at an early age. You said you wanted to do this, your whole life. Mm-hmm. Well, if you can start on something at an early age, right? You're that much farther ahead.
Yeah, and that's a very important piece, and that's exactly what along the lines of what I was going to say is providing those resources and providing that knowledge of older generations to that young generation, to who's following us and who's going to fill our shoes one day. And so I think, just starting, at bottom and informing them, that's how we're going to.
Alex, how easy or hard was it for you to get your foot in the door? Because a lot of young people are turning away from journalism. Some even want to be influencers today and make quick money instead of working the hard road of journalism as reporters, anchors, behind the scenes. What was it like for you?
I actually entered college as a print journalism major. And then I thought, well, that's not the future. I just felt like, things were just changing. And I thought, maybe I should, go more towards, the broadcast track. And actually in the midst of that degree program, realizing that I would be a one-woman band and I would be, shooting my own video, editing it, being in front of the camera, running my live shots by myself. I mean, it's hard work. It's hard. I can understand why people look at that and think, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I want to commit to that. And it wasn't easy. But, just like Amir said, not giving up, there are days where you want to, but you don't. And what I credit it to is to a lot of wonderful mentors. People who have, kind of been there on my worst days and said, I remember my college professor, she's a big mentor of mine, and I just had a rough day. And, I said, Dr. Kite, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I want to do this. And she said, if you don't do this, she goes, then I'm quitting my job because I failed. Because she was like, you were born to do this, you know, and just having those people that lift you up when you think you might not be able to do it, and making sure that we're creating direct paths for people, because it's hard because you're working unpaid internships, you know, and you're making not great money in the beginning, and it's not easy when you don't have generational wealth to just break into it. So creating, you know, opportunities, resources, all those kinds of things I think are really important. And it kind of just reminds me, you know, Al talking about how, oh, you know, this generation, I'm worried about it. It always reminds me of that quote by Coretta Scott King, which is, freedom is never really won. You fight and you earn it in every generation. So every generation has their fight. And there's a lot of, it mirrors, you know, the generation before that. And we hopefully get things a little bit more right the next time and the next time. But I think leaning on each other is really important.
And that's really good for you to know just how hard of a struggle it is. I know what you're going through right now, and a lot of younger journalists are arriving, say, in a market like Detroit much sooner than we did. But even in a small market like we did in Lansing, we had to do it all too. We had to write it, we had to edit it, we had to run things down the hall, you had to produce it. We had to do every job in the newsroom, correct?
We did radio too while we were doing television.
Yeah, so it was a struggle.
We juggled a lot of balls.
Yes. I was a fill-in producer. I was a fill-in anchor. I mean, I was running my prompter while anchoring a show.
Which is a good thing, because you get your feet wet in every job.
You're so
in the
well-rounded.
Newsroom. Well-rounded, and you appreciate everybody in the newsroom, because you know
Absolutely.
it takes a team to get even a program like this on. If you look at all of these people working to get this on, it's a good lesson to learn.
All right, let's have a little bit more fun about WGPR history.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
I mean, a show that you watched, that I certainly was aware of as well. It was one of the original programming hits on this television station, and that was The Scene.
With Nat Morris.
With Nat
I
Morris.
watched it every night, loved it. I mean, what was that like? That was, I mean, it was Detroit's version of Soul Train. I watched Soul Train every Saturday, but I also watched The Scene and loved it.
I have so many people talk to me about The Scene, and when I'd be walking out, we'd have like lines and 10 abreast
Waiting
lines,
to get in.
waiting to get in. Yeah. And I mean, they came to work. They came to work. And it was just a beautiful thing. Everybody loved it. Everybody was talking about it. Everybody was bringing their friends. And it's like, it was a precursor, you know?
And every major group who came in town would come on The Scene, right, and perform.
You probably can't name one that didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was watching pictures like the Dramatics, the Silvers. You saw pictures with the guys with the big fros, right?
Yeah.
Can you remember any other ones that would come on The Scene?
They had James Brown here.
Yes.
Yeah. They had a lot of A-list African-American entertainers that would come in.
Well, and it was an everyday show too. I mean, it wasn't once a week, right? I mean, and people coming from all over the city, right, to have that opportunity on The Scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have a great time. Yeah. Great time.
What were your thoughts when you saw some of the footage? You saw some of the kids dancing, and I don't know if you guys remember Soul Train or American Bandstand, and then to look and to think a show like that happened right here with kids from all over Detroit clamoring to get on that show.
I was just hoping we would have a point in this program we were going to get down like that.
we can. You know, we can.
I don't care. I know you want to.
That's that younger generation again, right here.
That's right. I told them. We're in trouble.
Exactly. Because they do it on TikTok.
It's good
back
trouble,
in the day,
though,
it was
just
on
like
The
John
Scene, right?
said.
Yes.
Good trouble. Good trouble.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they had big time wrestling here as well, right? They set up the ring, and Bobo Brazil and the Sheik and all those guys. They did their thing in this.
Brazil, he's from yesteryear.
Oh yeah, but
Wow.
they were here in this
H-Stack
studio.
Calhoun.
Oh, were they in this studio?
Yeah.
I didn't see pictures of them. They're on the wall too.
Well, there's
Bobo
right
Brazil?
over here, over our shoulder, I think. Big
I'm
time
sure
wrestling.
you all know, right?
Yeah.
It was before what, the WWE? Yeah.
World Wrestling Federation.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you know what's about WGPR and the black-owned TV station? To my knowledge, there has never been another black-owned TV station in the country. And, you know, that says a lot about what we still have to do. But that was a monumental event for the African-American community to have a black-owned TV station in the city of Detroit.
And then talk about the man who started it. I mean, he was a minister in Detroit. He was an attorney in the city of Detroit. He was a mason. You know what I mean? I mean, he was a visionary.
Yes, he had the vision. He saw something in the city that we desperately needed, and he went after that. And that says a lot about what WGPR,
Yeah.
Well, you need capital, and it's very difficult for African Americans to get capital to even buy television stations. And so many are out of reach because you have so many companies that own so many today.
Stations,
So many stations.
So we're encouraging everyone watching, you know, to experience this museum, the former studios here. You know, as you look at the walls and the exhibits, you know, Amir and Al were here from the beginning. Number one, I'm sure it brings back an awful lot of memories. But again, don't you think we all would benefit from learning a little bit more about the history of this television station and the impact on our community that WGPR has had?
Absolutely. I did, over in this corner, I did a morning show. And over in that corner, I was Amir Porter. We did a talk show called Porter House. And then we had news right over there. And you just can, you know, you walk over and you start to feel things. You reminisce, and it's like, wow, this was really something. But as is typical, we didn't know we were creating anything. We just had jobs, you know, and having a good time. I didn't know making history. I felt that you can compare them any way you want to. This is just as important, maybe, well, I won't say more so, just as important as Motown. I mean, that's a big, major thing that happened in Detroit that had all kinds of stories and building blocks and all kinds of things. And we need to promote. We need to promote ourselves more.
Well, what's amazing is when you look at the transformation of this place, just as I've looked at the transformation of the Motown Museum, these are landmarks that people will come to the city of Detroit to see and to walk through and can look at the history and how television has been transformed.
It's just so different. I remember Esther Edwards had asked me to interview something that was going on she wanted to get involved in. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do it. And she was a real supporter. Of course, she ran the museum, as you know. She did. But she just, oh gosh, she was something else. Anyway, so there was this big dinner honoring her for her trying to make the museum where she thought it ought to be. And towards the end of it, and a lot of the Motown stars were there, and Barry Gordy was there. So at the last part, they asked all the Motown people to come up on the stage and dance. I'm telling this especially for you, Carolyn. And so I'm up there with them dancing, just having a good time, and I thought, what am I doing? I'm on the stage with Smokey Robinson, and get out of here. I left. I just thought it was so funny, though. But we had fun, and it was just wonderful. Anyway, you cut it.
Well, you know, when I spoke to Barry Gordy's niece this past week, she was talking about the $65 million that they've just raised to turn that into a 50,000 square foot museum, which is going to be exceptional. I mean, what's the future here? What do you see this space becoming? Because I know it's a huge building, and there's so much more to come. Do you know what the history has?
I think we've made a good start, but there's, you know, this is also, it's a teaching facility as well. And you can come in and do interaction things, watch things, and do a newscast. And I think that's important for people to, I think you alluded to it earlier, that you got to learn, you got to know, you got to take the steps or you're not going to work it out. But we need more teaching opportunities. And we have one here that I'm very proud of, I hope. Yeah.
Hands-on experience.
Yeah.
And if we can start it earlier, right, then later, Al, we're all better off.
Yes, we are. We were talking about Esther Gordy Edwards, Barry's sister. We became friends, and we would talk all the time. She told me one day, she says, Al, you know, I've been going to Barry, and I says, Barry, we need $300,000 to start this museum. And he says, no, you know, I'm not spending that kind of money.
300,000?
300,000.
Now they're up to 65 million.
Yeah, And she said, and she just lasted 2 or 3 years. And she kept, every time I see her, Al, every time I talk to him, I remind him about this museum we want to have. So finally she called me one day, she says, Al, guess what? He's going to give us the $300,000. And we broke the story too on top of that. But she says, and she said it, he finally realized that this museum represented more than a building with a recording studio and talent.
Yeah.
It was part of the history of Detroit. And she says now he understands, you know. But that's sometimes what it takes to get people to move forward, to do things that, you know, perhaps you didn't do or you didn't think you were able to do it.
And more than 100,000 people visit the Motown Museum
from
every
all
year.
over the world.
From all over the
you
world.
See the tour buses lined up out there?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and they come from all over the world to go to the museum.
She said people come and they just get amazed by the candy machine and by the piano. She said one Japanese guy walked in and saw the piano and fainted.
In Studio A, right?
That's what she said, yeah.
Now you, Alex, Blake, what do you think? I mean, when young people will walk through here and look at the walls and see the pictures and see the history of Detroit on these walls, I mean, why will young people be interested in this?
I mean, it's so motivating. It's amazing. I mean, when you read the stories, when you read what they did, what they were up against, and still did this. My first nightside shift, I covered the expansion of the Motown Museum, and I was this close to interviewing Smokey Robinson, and it was the coolest thing ever. I mean, like to this day, I'm just like, wow, you know, and you just feel that energy, you know, that greatness was here and is here and is going to continue to be here. And you know, I think if you lean into that, then you know, it's hard for me to think of why they wouldn't be interested, at least for me. You know, I'm a big news nerd, you know, big history nerd, you know, all those things. And, you know, just be open. I think that they just need to be open to understanding that there's so many stories we don't know. And that's, once again, going back to why diversity is so important, why this place is so important, because it was, you know, some of the first times that Black journalists were telling Black stories, you know, and that's so different. It's very different, you know, obviously. So yeah, I mean, it's just, there's so much to know, to learn, and, you know, I'm humbled to
And a lot of the journalists who have walked through these halls have gone on to do bigger news in other markets, in LA and in New York, you know, and done amazing things.
So, young man, what goals, what dreams, aspirations do you have?
Well, first, I want to, of course, just make a name for myself in this field, and hopefully one day get to ESPN. And you know, once I get there, I've thought a lot about, you know, what I would do, you know, once I got there, and you know, of course, first my job, but also, you know, just kind of paving a way for younger, you know, kids like I was, you know, who wanted to do this, and you know, giving them, you know, that blueprint of where to start, and what they need to do, you know, to one day, you know, become a face on TV.
I want to tell you one quick story before we wrap our show for tonight. But a young man by the name of Jay Harris worked with me in Pittsburgh. He started out in radio and had an amazing voice and did news on radio and music on radio. And then he came to our station in Pittsburgh, the Fox affiliate, right? And ESPN called him because he was an anchor on our station and said, Jay Harris, come on to ESPN. And he's been there ever since. But he's very well-rounded. Started in news. You have to be a great reporter.
Yes,
you know what I mean? A
of
great
course,
anchor.
of
And then he
course.
landed on ESPN.
Well, you've got some great mentors right in this room,
course.
right? That'll help you on that path forward. So we wish you certainly the best of luck.
Including this guy here who started in sports and now, of course, is an anchor.
Yes, you did indeed. And I want to thank you and Alex and Al and Amir for being here with us, spending this time talking about the history and legacy of WGPR, the past, and also what's to come in this space as well to help the next generation and the generation beyond that.
And guess what? We want to thank you all for joining us for this very, very important conversation. Thank you all at home for joining us as well. I hope you got as much out of it as we have tonight.
Yeah, visit this museum. They're open every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. on East Jefferson in downtown Detroit. Also, a group of the station's alumni will be featured on GMA 3 tomorrow afternoon, immediately following 7 Action News at noon.
So make sure you watch that. Have a great night, and I hope this program gave you some insight into our history right here in the Motor City.